Blood Mantra, written by Nathaniel Griffin, read by the author. 1. It has been 8 summers since the day I buried my wife and our beautiful son Till. When I close my eyes, I still see them, running and laughing in the amber light of August sun, ghosts in the deepening mists of my memory. My heart was buried with them that day, swallowed by the deep and unfeeling earth of foreign lands. I am alone. The walls of this simple house, this home we built with our hands, creak and groan with the still ache of their absence. When the spring storms rage through the night, their winds howl with the anguish of what I've lost. This place is no longer my home. I am alone. I was a knight once, a soldier for the Teutonic cause. Helfen, Viren, Heilen. Help, defend, heal. These were the words that inspired my heart and the hearts of my brothers in arms. I left the order in the year of our Lord 1381, after a decade of campaigns and battles so that my son might know a life of peace. I was 30. We packed up our small but happy life and went east, to the shadow of the Carpathians. I traded the sword for the plow, and we carved contentment from the rich black earth. We grew potatoes, carrots, cabbages. We raised cows. We would eat our supper with the marigold sun embracing the mountains like a lover, painting the vast sky in tapestries of gold, violet, and crimson. I told my son the tales of the ancient heroes, of Achilles, of Beowulf. My beautiful angel Adela and I made love under the stars. It was a simple life, full of love and light. Adela was with child, a daughter, we were so sure, when the curse came. At that time, I thought it to be pestilence, some virulency brought from the marshes with the coyotes perhaps, or tainted grain traded from the markets. Though I prayed and gathered good herbs from the stony hills and prayed more, nothing. I petitioned an empty sky. It was hot and dark the night that Adela uttered a throat-ripping scream, a cry that still claws at the walls of my mind. I ran to her and saw the slick blood that wet her hands and stained her gown. Within the hour, we sat on the cold floor, staring at each other in silence as the small, pink form that was to be our future lay between us, still and growing cold. A gulf opened beneath us then, and we fell, though I'd only begun to realize how far. A month later, with the grass barely grown over the tiny grave I dug beneath our ancient oak, Till simply collapsed. I ran to him and cradled his small, brave head, shaking him. His eyes rolled back in their cavernous sockets. He opened his skeletal mouth and released one final, shuddering breath. I still remember the smell of cinnamon from the sweet we had gotten him to nibble. I screamed and screamed, roaring my defiance, and calling him back from where I could not follow. Adela said nothing. She only stared, seeing something I could not see. She was dead within the week. The mighty oak stood over everything I loved by the end of that summer. Even he bent beneath the weight. It was nearly a decade before I could clean their things and decide to make a choice. The years passed in an eternity and in a day. The oak was withered, his last leaves long fallen. I went about the task of removing their dead shroud from my tenebrous half-life like an automaton, shuffling on lead feet, hands numb as they sorted trinkets and baubles, moth-eaten dresses and lovingly carved wooden toys gone useless with age and the lack of little hands to bring them to life. Sometimes I would laugh, cackles that rang back like mad ravens against my ears. Often I would weep as their ghosts poured the caress of lost love onto my shoulders. I gathered their things and piled them high under the dead oak, his hard gray form towering into the morning, an exclamation of my ruined world. The oak would burn with my memories, with my flesh. As I walked back to the house, I passed the small pond in our yard. Its black surface was still and smooth as glass. My God, but I had gotten old young. Streaks of gray patterned my black hair and beard. My eyes, once as blue as the falcon's infinite skies, were now flat and slate gray. I was a big man, and while my arms were still strong, my chest still powerful, there was a diminishment to my form, an impression of not being there as much as I was. I stood and stared at the crumbled temple of the man I once was a few moments longer, and then returned to my moribund task. I would burn above them, on the wrong side of the grass, and perhaps my ashes would land in the place they were, reuniting us after so long. I walked back through the door, looking about at the emptiness. All that was left was to drag out the beds. I bent and grabbed the end of Till's small bed. It was lighter than I remembered. I lifted easily and began pulling it backward. I'd gone only a few feet when I dropped it again, wordless negations tumbling from my numb lips. My hands were cold. I noticed in some faraway part of myself that all the birds outside had gone quiet. There, on the floor, carved delicately into the boards, were 1,000 wheeling ideograms. Their hieroglyphics were impossibly intricate, full of arcane method and sinister implication. I fell to my knees and studied them. Their hollow lines were filled with the color of rust, blood, old blood. Suddenly and certainly I knew that this dark magic had exsanguinated my little son, drawn his blood from him slowly, but as surely as that which is drawn by a razor. I rushed to my bed and tossed it aside with a strangled cry. There, under Adela's side, more runes. I collapsed. They had been killed, stolen from me by some unknowable evil, their lives witched away through these crimson portals. Where surrender had blossomed over the years, opening creaking black petals in my soul, vengeance now burned like wormwood, igniting red hate. I had to find them. I would hunt the bastards to the end of the earth and beyond. I would crash the gates of hell if it meant I could wrap my fingers around the throats of my enemies. I had to think. The trail, if there was a trail, was 8 years cold, and all I had to lead me to it were these infernal scrawlings, these whirls and birds, stars, and so many moons. Moons, that was it. A memory surfaced like a bone from quicksand, of a warning given to me by the local bone reader when we moved into these hills. She who walks with the moon in her chest, who lays with him like a lover, will demand a price in midnight black and blood red. She will feed. Rasma, the oracle's name had been, a poor man's oracle. I hadn't paid it any heed then. Only Christ, the Father, and the Holy Ghost could know a man's future. But now, Rasma would demand something of me, I knew, but I had to go to her. To know what she knew. I packed my bag, grabbed my longsword, and set fire to the house, the tree, and my life. I would not be coming back to them. 2. The soothsayer's hut was a wonder in dishevelment. Bones and flowers decorated the walls in equal measure, with potions, tinctures, and things floating in amber liquid filling every centimeter of available shelf space. To my surprise, the smell was pleasant, a slight air of shooting star and wild vanilla. I could hear a cat purring somewhere, large from the sound, though the owner of the voice was nowhere to be seen. I suppose I'd expected some heathen hovel, with a cauldron full of unspeakable things boiling over a fire. This was none of that. The seer herself had greeted me meekly, even cautiously, at my insistent rapping on her warped wooden door. She stood before me, and I could see she had once been beautiful, before the witch hunter's flames had licked away her loveliness. She was perhaps 5 years my junior, with long, strawberry blonde hair and a curvilinear figure. A spill of black lace like a widow's veil fell down to conceal the pink, twisted scars on the right side of her face. Her one good eye, startlingly green, like an emerald caught in freefall, would meet mine, then dart away abashed. I brushed the dust from the road from my pants and did my best to be a gentleman, though it had been long and long since I had concerned myself with chivalry or graces of any kind. "Good evening, my lady. I hope I'm not intruding." Rasma's eyes darted to the pommel of my sword, saw the crest of the Teutonic there, no doubt. "Please, fear me not, gentlewoman. My name is Arnheim, and I mean you no harm." She seemed to calm a bit at that. "I hope, that is, I pray you might help me." Her voice was gentle and quiet and sweet as summer winds. "I will do my best, Her Knight. Please, call me Arnheim." "Sir, Arnheim, what do you ask of me?" I did all I could to keep the grief and rage from my words. "I am bereaved, thrice so, and I believe my family was murdered by evil magics. I need your help to find the culprits." She weighed my words a moment and said, "I am confident I can help. I am a talented seer, but to counter evil magic," she straightened, regaining some pride, "is no easy feat, and dangerous for us both. I will need payment." Her words trailed off. Her eyes slowly crept down my body, resting a while. "These woods are cold, and I am wretched." When it was done, the gasps and moans faded from the evening. I stood, buckling my breeches. I started to pull my tunic down over my head, wincing at the fresh scratches on my back, when Rasmus stopped me with a deceptively strong hand. "No, leave it. I will need the blood." She stood, naked before me, and reached into the sweet and pungent cleft between her thighs. She withdrew her hand, wet and glistening, and began to trace weird symbols on a square of eggshell-colored cloth. "I need your blood, your hair, and your essence." With that, she deftly snatched a bundle of hairs from my head and ran a finger up my back, gathering droplets of my blood. She laid the hairs out in crisscrossing ideograms and flicked the blood onto the cloth with a snap of her wrist. The air in the hut began to thrum and vibrate with some primordial energy. I felt the hairs on my skin prickle, as though I was standing in the moment before a lightning strike. Rasmus started to mutter, some incantation that sounded a bit like Latin, but older, more guttural. Her voice dropped a few octaves, now booming. She withdrew a long, ivory bear claw from a hidden pocket and cast it carelessly onto the cloth. It stopped a few inches above the surface, snapping into a quivering orientation I somehow knew was west. The oracle turned to me, the hair floating like a halo of serpents about her head. Her eyes held cosmos. Her voice was antediluvian. "Now! Speak the name of that which propels you, that which owns your heart. Now!" Only one name came to mind. Adela. There was a thunderclap, an elemental shattering that pummeled me backward. The bear claw exploded into bright white dust, which slowly settled on the cloth below. As I watched, symbols, lines, and curves burned into the cloth. A map. The magic done, Rasma depleted. She appeared ready to collapse, drained by some unseen entropic hand. "Come, help me sit." I did as I was bidden, helping her into a huge, overstuffed chair. She pulled a blanket down over her naked frame and gestured for me to bring her the map. I went to the table and picked it up, gingerly at first, and brought it to her. I thought I knew the region it described, but those deep woods meant nothing to me. When Rasma looked upon it, however, she gasped and gripped my wrist with a strength born of terror. "Cry off, knight! I beg of you! Cry off and live the rest of your days in peace!" I snatched my hand away, my anger returning like a storm to a shore. "You have no idea what you ask of me, woman. You may as well ask that I lie down and die now." "Better that than fling yourself into the pit. You go seeking demons, Arnheim. This is a map to the grave of Baruda. Anything you find there will destroy you. Any pact you make there will be a pact for your soul." I considered what she said briefly. If my soul was the cost of justice for my family, I would gladly pay it. There was strength yet left in me, a black inferno that roared in the engine at my core. How could her heart feel fear when it so fervently sought the darkness? "I'm going. Demons or no, I will have my revenge for what has been wrought. Thank you for your help." Rasma looked away, looking older than when I had come. Her face clouded. She spat. "Thank me for nothing, damned one. Take that awful thing and go. If you come back this way, it will be to meet fire in the rope." She turned away from me and said no more. I left, closing the door behind me. On the other side, I heard the heavy iron bolt thud into place. The night was windy, with the first chill of autumn creeping its fingers into the bone. I looked at the map. It had a faint glow, its lines traced in ember red, smoldering without heat. I walked down the dirt path from the seer's hut to the rutted wagon road and turned west. As I did, the map flared, burning brighter in my hands but with a chill alien to the light. I loosened my blade in its scabbard and yanked up the hood of my cloak, taking my first steps toward damnation. 3. I'd come perhaps 20 leagues from Rasma's hut over the last week, my fury spurring me forward, filling me more completely than any bread ever could. I was a war engine, and I meant to grind my quarry to dust. Once, on my third, perhaps fourth day on the western road, I was accosted by 2 highwaymen demanding a toll of coin to allow my passage. I left their heads on stakes at the side of the road. Perhaps the next would reconsider the wages of their sins. I reached the western forest at noon, with the sun at its dizzying zenith in the cerulean vault of heaven. Behind me, the Carpathians loomed in a haze of no color, like the corpses of giants. My head buzzed, as though hornets had crawled through my eyes and nested while I slept. My water was 2 days gone, though I did not feel the thirst. In any case, I was sure there would be something to drink in the forest. It stretched below me, its viridian expanses obfuscating the miles of basin in which it lay. I strode forward and entered its eternal green twilight. The trunks of great pines and oaks, firs and alders towered around me like the pillars of the house of some emerald god. Soft moss blanketed nearly everything, so dark a green it was almost black. I reached into my pack to withdraw the map. It was gone. I did not lose it, did not drop it by the wayside, and the only robbers that had tried to take what was mine now stood never-ending sentinel in my wake, the crows eating their eyes. I withdrew my hand, wondering what I would do when I saw it. There, in the palm of my left hand, was the map. Its charred image was burned into the skin of my hand. I could not breathe. My spine felt like glass. Black ice water filled my bowels. What sorcery had that half-burned witch put on me? I shook my head, clearing my thoughts. I had asked for this magic. One hand was no cost at all. Now that I had calmed a bit, I could feel a strange pull in the flesh there. It was strange, but not unpleasant. A low, sweet itch that you relish instead of despise. I held my hand out, tentatively. I felt a vibration travel up my arm. I swept it right, then left. A jolt, a shock so powerful it rocked me back on my feet and froze my arm. I knew which way I must go. 4. I had been walking for hours, tumbling deeper and deeper into this endless green maze. The air was filled with the sounds of the forest, shrill cries, chirps, and calls. There were also sounds I didn't recognize, ululating gurgles that rose and fell hauntingly away. Buzzing, double voices that spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but understood anyway. Whispers from the underbrush and from the canopies overhead. At the periphery of my sight, shadow figures stood, watching my passage, but disappeared into mist, into dream smoke when I turned my gaze to behold them. Once, I nearly stepped on a strange creature. It had a body not unlike a badger, strong with long, blunt claws, but the face of a man, hirsute and ponderous. It seemed to thank me with its silence before it scurried off into the woods. As true twilight deepened, and my arm became a throbbing divining rod, I came at last to the grave of Baruda. I didn't know anymore if it was the seer's magic or his that had brought me here, nor did I care. The place was as Rasma had said, sunken. The entire temple, if one could call it a temple, sat in a deep depression below me, as though a titan had crushed it with one behemoth hand, laying it low before she died from the earth. The structure was constructed of rough-hewn granite blocks made unrecognizable by time, wind, water, and ivy. Steps descended into purple obscurity, and I thought I could make out simple but immense stone doors at their end. I started to walk forward, carefully, as the stairs were worn almost smooth, by the comings and goings of what I did not wish to imagine. When I noticed the forest had gone silent, all around me it was as if the sky itself had opened up, sucking all sound and life into the dark infinity beyond. All life that was, save for me. I felt suddenly watched. The hairs on my body stood on end. I was cold with a deep fear, breathless with a deeper wonder. What new phantom came for me? My mouth went dry, and my arm, its power which had brought me here, went silent. I felt empty and denuded as it returned once more to mundanity. I turned slowly. Something was behind me. I could sense it out there between the trees, watching me. I drew my blade. I came here as a conqueror, not a pilgrim, and I would not be stopped, not here on the steps to salvation and vengeance. Suddenly, I could see it. I could not be blamed for missing it. It stood utterly motionless, as still as the stones and the trees themselves. How long it had been following me, I could not know. There, between two gnarled and timeless oaks, it stood in shadows. By God, it was immense. Its form betrayed nature and reason. Though the night brought shadows as deep and black as ink, I thought I could make out a handful of its features. It must have been 2 meters tall, a hellish amalgam of bones and wood, horns and ivy. It stood on 2 hind legs, one inverted, as a horse or deer, and one with a front-facing knee like a man. Its cavernous chest was a great naked ribcage. A bear's, perhaps, or a moose. Long, murderous arms dangled at its side. One terminated in a gnarled burl, twice as big around as my chest, looking almost made for crushing men. The other had 3 long fingers, twists of bone, hair, vulture, deer, that ended in long, wicked claws. Or were they antlers? Its head was the skull of some colossal buck. A rack of moss-covered antlers spread as wide as my arms. Throughout its figure, vines and branches were woven like arteries. What golem was this? What devil's homunculus? Was it a guardian of this wood meant to keep intruders away? Or did it exist to drive men into the stone mausoleum behind me? As I stared, the creature jerked forward suddenly in stuttering movements devoid of any natural order. I had no time to think. I turned and ran for the doors. Behind me, it charged, its steps pulling thunder from the earth.